Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 890A, and today's date is February 10th, 2016, and the title of the episode is Countries Are Faking Their Economic Stats to Keep the Economic Recovery Illusion Alive. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, we've been noticing that this market, it is like a roller coaster. One day it's up, one day it's way down, the next day it's down, then it's up again, and we see the high-frequency traders, the plunge protection team, they're doing whatever they possibly can to keep the market alive. Actually, midday yesterday, all of a sudden we saw this huge surge, and the market went straight up, and it looks like it was completely manipulated, and they tried to hide it as best they could, but you can definitely notice from the graph of how the market did where the push was. And we understand why they're doing this. They need to keep the illusion alive that the economy here in the U.S., around the world, is still doing fine. A lot of countries now are faking, manipulating, massaging the numbers to make them seem a lot better than they really are. Out in Australia, we see they're following in the footsteps of the United States. The Australia's Bureau of Statistics reported that a whopping 58,600 jobs have been added, and they're saying, see, we are doing very well, we have added the jobs. And then a month later, they thought there was going to be a 10,000 drop in jobs in November. Now, this was back about 2 to 3 months now. And instead of a 10,000 drop, all of a sudden, they came out with numbers saying that 71,400 jobs were added, the most in 15 years. And this is the equivalent of 1 million jobs added in the U.S. Now, the corporate media, the alternative media, was out there, and they're saying, okay, something doesn't make sense here. This can't be true. But the government's saying, yes, these are the numbers. Everything is fine. And we come to find out that all of this was completely manipulated. Now, they're saying it's a technical error. Of course, this is what they use when they get caught. And Australia's Treasury Secretary, John Fraser, he was testifying in front of the parliamentary committee, and he admitted that the job growth for the 2 months in question may have been overstated. And of course, they said it was technical issues. It's the same thing the U.S. uses, where they say, yeah, we had problems and the numbers weren't right. It's almost like when we look back at the GDP numbers, when we look at the unemployment numbers, when we look at the sales of homes, they always go back and they revise the numbers down when no one is looking. They pump them up, but we are catching what they're doing every single time. And we're going to see a lot of countries do this because as the economy completely falls apart, they need a way to convince everyone that everything is fine. And they're trying to do this because what we're seeing out in the economy, it is slowly dying, and it is not going to recover any time soon. The Baltic Dry Index right now dropped another point. It's at 290. And I see in the corporate media, they're starting to mention the Baltic Dry Index, which they normally never do. And I see one of the headlines out there saying that the Baltic Index plunges to all-time lows because eventually they're going to have to recognize there's something going on here. And it says this could spark recession fears. Well, we've been tracking the Baltic Dry Index for a very long time. And if you notice, the corporate media only steps in when they have to because people are saying, well, what about this? Aren't you reporting on this? It's so low right now. No one has ever seen this before. What does this mean? Well, what it means is that global trade is seizing up. This is a record decline for the 12th straight session, and it is 98% down from its peak of 11,793 in May of 2008, marking the lowest level since the record began in 1985. We are not sparking fears of a recession. We're not even in a recession. We are in a global depression at this point. The CEO of Maersk, one of the largest shipping companies, well, he just gave the entire world a reality check when it comes to global growth and trade. He's out there and he's saying, well, the world's economy is growing at a slower pace than the International Monetary Fund and other large forecasters have predicted. Really, when has the IMF ever been correct in their predictions? Of course, what they do is they come out and they say, yes, this year of 2016 and 2017, we're going to see 2.5% growth in GDP. Next year, it's going to be even better. It'll be 3.5. And we know these numbers are always revised lower. And we see in the year of 2015, for Maersk, profits fell a whopping 84%. And this is showing us that something is wrong. He went on to say that, well, things are a lot worse than we thought. How bad is it? Well, it's so bad that there's right now a supply glut, and the problem that we're having, it's worse than 2008. Imports to Brazil, Europe, Russia, Africa, it's all falling. The company's business is suffering from massive deterioration. So what is he trying to say? He's telling everyone we have a major problem on our hands right now. And it's worse than 2008. And we know what happened in 2008. We were in the Great Recession. Well, if that was the Great Recession, and we're worse than that right now, we're in a depression? We're in a collapse? But again, no one's going to admit this. Nobody. Now, Deutsche Bank, they are having a huge amount of troubles. Their bank stock has dropped. And we see that David Stockman is out there. And he is saying that the Deutsche Bank CEO, John Crine, when he said Germany's largest bank is rock solid, it's contained, there's nothing to worry about, he is saying everyone should start worrying at this point. And I agree, and this is what we've been talking about. Anytime these people come out and say it's contained, the problem is fine, look over there, we have a huge problem on our hands. And that means this company, this bank, it's going to collapse. And whenever they come out there, everyone should be aware that we have major problems coming. Now, to boost Deutsche Bank and other bank stocks up, the ECB came out and they spread a rumor that the ECB may monetize bank stocks. I mean, look how far they have to go to keep this system alive. Because this system is one gigantic bubble which is ready to come crashing down. And if Deutsche Bank goes, guess what? This thing is going to spread across Europe. It's going to hit the United States. And it's going to be a major, major problem. So they put out a trial balloon saying that, yeah, well, we might be able to monetize the bank stocks. And we saw all of a sudden Deutsche Bank stock skyrocket at this point. And we can see at this point they're using everything they possibly have to keep the economies propped up. Now, JP Morgan is out there, and they're saying that the ECB, Bank of Japan, and even the Fed, they're saying they're going to cut rates even further. And this is their prediction. They're saying the ECB is going to cut rates to negative 4.5%. The Bank of Japan is going to be negative 3.45%. And they said if the Fed eventually is going to bring the rates down to negative 1.3%. This is, again, This is how desperate they are. When have you ever seen negative interest rates like what they're predicting here? Never! Why would you even have to do this? Well, you would have to do this to save the banks. You would have to do this to try to save the economy because they don't know what else to do. They created money. They created money. They created money. I should say currency. And they continually did this. None of it came down to the people and went all to the banks, into the stock market. The banks are insolvent. The banks are teetering on collapsing and bringing all the other banks down. And they're doing whatever they possibly can to keep the system alive. And we see that there are some people out there saying part of these negative interest rates is to drive small banks out of business so they can eliminate cash altogether. More than 1/5 of the world's total GDP is in countries which have imposed negative interest rates, including Japan, EU, Denmark, Switzerland, and Sweden. Negative interest rates, as we know, are spreading worldwide. And yet, negative interest rates, supposed to help economies recover, well, they haven't done anything for Japan or Europe, and they will not do anything for the US. So they really thought by bringing down the interest rates, people would not keep their cash in the banks. I don't know why you would, but they thought people would go out and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to spend the money, I'm going to put it in the stock market. And what they're noticing is that with these negative interest rates in Japan, in Europe, they're noticing that consumers, they're not spending their cash. In fact, they're saving their cash. So why is this happening? Because everyone is scared. Lower interest rates have wrecked many of the retirees' retirement plans. They have no retirement at this time. They're getting very nervous. And at this point, if they put money into any of these plans, what type of return are they getting? There's nothing. So everyone is very nervous. Those people who are losing their jobs, they're not going to go out and spend because they are nervous. I don't think the central bankers realize what is happening in this economy. Yes, they're very wealthy. Yes, all the wealth is siphoning up to them. But what's really going on in the economy, I think they believe that there's still more to take from the people. And there's nothing left from the people. Challenger Gray and Christmas is telling us there are more layoffs coming down the pike. People are being laid off right now. Stores are closing. People are not purchasing homes. And all of this is spreading across to other countries. Canada is crumbling apart. Europe is crumbling apart. Australia is on its way. Global trade is a complete disaster. We see inventories are building up. No one is going out and purchasing, so there's no demand, which means manufacturers, factories, they're not producing, which means they don't need the raw material. And the Baltic Dry Index continually falls. And we're approaching a time when this whole system, one little spark, one little black swan event, a bank collapsing, doesn't even have to be the biggest bank, will completely bring down everything. And this is what we're seeing at this point. This is how bad it has gotten. Because what do we see happening right now? We see the central bank using all the tricks they possibly can muster up to continually keep this system propped up. Because they're so nervous, they're so afraid of something happening outside of their control. Because if this whole system comes down and they're not controlling it, and it just continues on and it builds momentum and it accelerates and more banks fail and it spreads across the private Western central bank countries, they will not be able to stop it. And everyone will look at the central banks and say, okay, for the last 7 years, 8 years, you've been telling us the economy is absolutely fine. You raised your interest rates. The President of the United States, we see Australia, we see the ECB, we see France, UK telling everyone that everything is fine. The economies are doing well, and then all of a sudden everything crashes. Well, they can't let this happen. They can't be blamed for what is coming. Because as we know, when this system falls apart, they want to restart it again. They know the system's dying. They know it can't be sustained. They just want it done in their way, so they're not blamed. So later on, after the wars, after everything else, they can completely restart the system and start from scratch once again. And this is why we see a lot of this moving from the west to the east, because the new system is being set up right now. The system in China, the system in Russia. Now, does this mean the central bankers are not going to have control of this new system? Well, no, they're going to have control. And when I say restarted, it doesn't mean it's going to be the central bank in the United States. Because the central bankers don't care where they're located. They have no allegiance to a government. They have no allegiance to a people. Their allegiance is to debt, to themselves. So at this point, it doesn't really matter where it is. But we do have competing governments that want the reserve currency. The U.S. doesn't want to give this up. They will fight for it. And as we move forward, it is going to get worse. The economy will not improve. It's completely impossible for the economy to improve. Will they make it look like it's improving? Yes, they will do whatever they possibly can to make it look like it's getting better. And we see out in the Middle East with Iran, they're ready to accept $100 billion in foreign investments. To add to the trouble, we see they're ready to bring in investments into their country. They're not going to use the dollar on their oil trade. And this, again, is a problem for the United States. Because the system is based on all of these countries using the dollar on their oil trade. And if each one of these countries do not do this, this system comes crumbling down. And this is what they're very worried about. This is why John Kerry was out there saying if we do not make the deal with Iran, the dollar collapses. Well, they made the deal with Iran, which had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. It had to do with the central bank. It had to do with oil. It had to do with the dollar as the reserve currency, the petrodollar. But we see Iran's not going along with this. We see Iran is saying, you know what? We're not going to be doing this. Because they know and they realize the dollar is dead. The dollar can no longer be used by other countries because it's losing all credibility. There's too much debt. And this economic system that they've created, the central banks have created, is completely and utterly dying right now. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.